Hello, we're back for Apidays Interface. I hope you had a good lunch or dinner, depending on where you are. But we'll continue this API platform and ecosystem track on the business side, and we'll focus for the next 2 hours on API product and API monetization. And as the first speaker, we will have Rafael Cardozo, who is solution architect at Syncytia, but who will talk about an API first approach to enable API monetization. So API first, API monetization, this is what we will have together. And for that, we have Rafael. Hello, Rafael. How are you doing?
Thank you. So I'm doing very, very good. I'm very happy to be here. And let's talk about API first and how can we use this approach to enable API monetization. So let's start introducing myself. My name is Rafael. I've been working with development, with architecture, integrating systems, migrating databases, and so on for more than 20 years. Today, I'm working in the Centricity company, which is a company focused on integrations, on APIs, and a good platform for APIs management. So please feel free to contact me by email, to contact me by LinkedIn or other social medias. Okay, I will be very happy to take a conversation. And today we are here to talk about technologies, methodologies, and so on. So let's start. I'd like to start by this diagram here. So looking for this diagram, I'm trying to give you an overview. So what are the challenges we have to make integrations? Okay, usually we are working in companies, in systems that are composed by very large pieces. We have several kind of databases. Probably we'll be handling legacy systems, different services. Sometimes we'll be working in a cloud-based. Sometimes we'll be working on-premises basis. So what are the challenges thinking in terms of integration? Do you need to use partners to enable our integrations? If it's necessary to use partner systems, partner assistance, is it easy to me to provide him an onboarding to integration? Is it easy for him to integrate it with my system? Do I have control of this ecosystem? Is it systems able? Are these systems able to scale up to attend some needs in terms of more calls, more processing, and so on? Or even other challenges. Am I able to understand the business? Do I have a clear business model? So during these challenges, we need to deliver integrations. In the end of the day, we need to deliver APIs. So here we will talk about APIs as a product, and how to monetize these APIs. And use an API first, we can solve this challenge. And what will be the benefits of using API first, and how it will help us to solve this challenge? It will help us to increase the time to market. It will help us to have a better partner integration. We can easily make some experimentation, some tests, some validations, and have a better API product. Let's see how is it possible and what is the proposal of API first. So, what is API first? Why should I use it? In a very short answer, I can say that API first means let's start by designing and writing the documentation of an API before any kind of development. We don't need to start implementing something, because API first will guide us in a way that, calm down, let's first design what we need. Let's first understand our business. Let's first write a good documentation. In an opposite way, let's say that we could start by coding, okay? Code first. Usually, following this model, we could place some piece of code and we can start connecting some systems. We can make some validations of integrations, and it will be growing. And now, to make it possible to monetize these applications we have built, we need to create APIs. Okay, but we started by the code, no problem. But now, will be my APIs using a correct approach, the right security patterns and everything, or it will be just a proxy for my backend operations? So let's think first in the APIs. Let's understand that when writing this design and when writing this documentation, we can have a clear understanding of all the process, of all the steps we need to have a good APIs. And remember, we are talking here about having API as a product. Okay, so it's even more important that this API design should be done carefully with all the details correctly analyzed. And how can we do that? We have three major principles we should follow. First of all, your API is your first interface for your application. Okay, Rafael, but I need to also expose some operations through my mobile app, through my web application, and so on. And no problem. But after all these channels, we need an API. The API will be the entry point to access those operations in the back end, to access the resources in the back end. So starting by the API design, we can ensure that even yours clients consuming the APIs for integrations, or your own team writing some web applications or some mobile applications, will be using a well-designed API. And doing that, we can say that API comes before the implementation. As I said, let's take care about our APIs. Let's design the best API as possible. And when thinking in documentation, we need to write a good documentation. We need to make an API which can be self-describing. You need to understand the behavior of your API just reading the documentation from top to bottom. It's important that this documentation should be clear. This documentation should be complete. It should be self-described. But we can exercise some scenarios to understand how can we do it in our development process. Okay, so using this approach, we need to be near to the stakeholders. Why? We are thinking in API as a product, remember? So the stakeholders should be involved. We need to be working in a way that the businessman, the manager, the developers, all the people, business team, developers, managers, should be using this mindset to create our product. Our product will be an API. Let's involve these people. Let's consulting them to write the documentation, to create the design, and all people involved working with this mindset. Again, before starting the code, we are creating our product. So it will give us some benefits. I can reduce the cost, I can reduce the risks, I can improve the experience of the developer which will be consuming this API. Because we need to remember that if I have an API which will be my product, I want this API to be more easy and more flexible as possible to the developer, which will be coding, which will be invoking this API. And let's work it in a way that is collaboratively approach. It can make us a division of responsibility. It allows a division of responsibility. We can have teams working in parallel, and we can start thinking in reusability. Okay, so we are thinking in APIs as a product. I need to take care of, can I reuse some method or some resource, some operation that I've already defined? It will be necessary to my developer to create a new operation that is already in place just for a small modification, for a small changing. Let's think about it. Let's put it on the paper. Let's take this time to build the best design, okay? And it will be done by developer team, business team, managers, and so on. Okay, so now we need to think in terms of how to what are the good practices when modeling an API? Okay, there are several strategies, there are several ways to do a good API model. Of course, I like to use domain-driven design. Okay, it's not the only one, but it helps us to understand our business and to create API models that are using the correct, the proper view of our domains. Let me explain. First of all, when you are using domain-driven design, we need to ensure that all people involved will be using the same language. And here, language, I'm not saying all the programming language. No, 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 no. It's the language we use to talk every day. We need to use the same words and the same expression to describe our business process, our business data, our business entities. We need to ensure that everyone is using the same language, and we need to ensure that we have bounded context. Okay, so we need to take our business, our project, our idea of a solution, and we need to split it in small pieces. And each piece we can call it as a domain or a module vision, let's say, and splitting a domain, and after that splitting it in subdomains, and it will be clarifying for us how to organize this information, how can it be connected to a good API design. Let's understand the data, understand the entities, understand the model. And once you have a domain model, we can use it to create the API design. I have an hypothetical example here just to trying to clarify these concepts of how can I use domain-driven design on this approach. So here, let's suppose we have some domains. I have an area here where the customer has its data, its entities. I have agreement, I have account, I have a product. So once I can split this information and clarify what entity and what are the relations between these entities, I can start thinking in the best way to organize my API. So once I have these domains view, I can move to an API view. Of course, there are several strategies here we can take, but it will not be always one by one, one for one. But a general idea is to clarify the understanding, and after that, write the API design and write the API documentation. So, moving on, we are talking about monetization. Okay, so if my API will be my product, I have to, during this process of business understanding and during this process of API design, we are talking about API first, we can identify what will be the monetization plan. There are several strategies to monetize an API. We can use subscription plans. We can use pay-per transaction. Of course, there are ways where the monetization is not directly connected to API consumption. I can have apps. Again, I can have mobile apps. I can have web apps that are consuming APIs, but in the end of the day, it is just a way to access data, to access resources, and I'm selling this data, I'm selling this resource. Okay, but here, in again, another hypothetical view, let's suppose we wanna monetize our APIs, and we will have billing plans, separated billing plans, and we want to monetize based on these different plans. So API first, applied on such context, will be helping us again. Because if I using all these steps to carefully creating, designing, writing documentation, when I'm here to split my plans and to understand how my APIs will work under different billing plan, I'm guaranteeing standardization. Is my API following a standard? Is it consistent? Or each time a developer moves from a plan to another, he needs to change the code. He needs to learn something new because it was not very clear in the documentation that a new plan can use different error handling, for instance. So take an API first will ensure that everything will work under a standard, will be consistent, and that we can reuse all the APIs that are already in place to extend new behaviors, to extend the new operations and new possibilities. So let's suppose here in this example, I have three billing plans. One is free with a limited amount of counts per month, a very basic throughput, rate limited that is one transaction per second. After that, I can use a standard plan, which probably I need to pay for it. It gives me more calls. It gives me a better rate limit. It gives me access to an analytic report or something like that. And even a better plan, which gives me unlimited calls, a better rate limit, and analytics, and even support services. Okay, I have designed this plan. How can I implement it? How can I document it in an easy way? When I'm calling an API as a developer, I don't want it to receive a documentation in PDF file with 100 pages to understand all the details and everything I need to know to make use of these plans. It should be easy and should be very clear in the API portal. The API portal is to receive your developer and say him, man, here is your plans. It's easy to understand. Do you want to start a test right now? Just click this button. You will be redirected to a sandbox area. You can play with this API in a very easy way. So you need to have API portal and how it connects to the API first approach. When I'm designing my API, I need to remember, do I have all the tools I need? My infrastructure is designed to receive these APIs I'm designing. Is it possible to scale this infrastructure? Maybe I need to move to another providers, to another strategy. When implementing this API, do I have a good tool to ensure security? Do I have a tool to ensure that I can create these billing plans in those policies in an easy way? So, thinking from the beginning, we can plan not only the code, we can plan everything around. So, again, do I have a tool to provide me a good API portal, a good developer experience? So that's important to be clear here. When your API is your product, we need to plan. You need to have much more. You need to take care of this design, and you need to make the life of the developers most easy as possible. So good documentation, good developer portal, good standardization, and make it clear for the developer how to use your APIs and how to reuse your APIs. So, what tools can we use during this process? Uh, let's talk a little bit about documentation, okay? Or usually, I prefer to use an open API specification. There are several ways to make the documentation of an API, but use an open API specification, you have some advantages. First of all, open API is a standard. Everyone around the world knows how to handle it, knows how to use it. Important that open API allows me to describe my API. Remember, it should be self-described, and it can be very easy to understand by a human. It's human readable. I can read the documentation and understand the documentation, but it's also useful for automation tools. I can apply this documentation over an automation tool, and it's easy to play around with this definition. It's easy to make some tests. It's easy to make some mocks, to validate, to connect it with my background systems. So I really recommend that we use an open API specification. We use Swagger Editor. These are tools to help us in this journey. There are also tools for monkey. I can use an API first approach. I can easily do some mocks and understand if my first idea, my original idea is good for the developer or maybe not so good. I don't know. I can use Postman to run some validations. I can use the SoapY. I can also use Sensidia for this action, especially when thinking about API management. Is it easy to have a life cycle view of all my APIs in an integrated tool? We have to use the best tools to have the best APIs, especially when the APIs are my products. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about Sensidia. Sensidia is a Brazilian company. We are specialized in APIs and microservices, governance. We are working also with event-driven architectures, service mesh, and so on. We have a modern integration platform, and we are specialized in this integration world, especially using APIs. We also have a good product for open finance ecosystem, and also the consulting services to help you in architecture, to help you in development, and to help you creating good integrations, good APIs. Okay, we are recognized as leader on global API strategy and also a stronger performer by Forrester. We have a global presence in the Americas, United States, Canada, Europe, and also Africa. So please, you can contact us to have more details. Okay. And that's what I have for today. I'd like to thank you for your time. I'm really glad to be here. Please contact me on LinkedIn, contact me in other social medias. And also, please, you can access, we have some QR codes here. You can access Centricity web page to know more about this subject and other subjects. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rafael. We reached the time we had together, but you told us that it would be exact on time, 25 minutes. Thank you very much for explaining all about this API monetization. And we'll look forward to having you in another conference.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will continue the conference with another talk, continuing on this time on API products from Anna Doherty, Product Marketing Manager at Stoplight, great company for managing, designing APIs. All right, about making customer-centric API products. Hello, Anna. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing really great. Yes, the stage is yours for 25 minutes. Thank you for being with us.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I want to say that everything Rafael was speaking on just now in the previous session really speaks our language. So we're going to take what he proposed and take it a step further with the idea of customer centricity. So you'll learn a little bit about API products in this, but we're going to really wrap your brain around what does it mean to be customer centric when you're working with API products. So next slide is, there we go. What is customer centricity, right? That might be your first question, is like, what does that even mean? If you're a technologist, if you're an API technologist, the chances are that you have been working on the language of the API, you've been working on building it, creating it, but maybe you haven't really been working from the customer's perspective, and maybe you've never been expected to do that before. So we wanted to bring this idea to you to kind of educate you on what does it mean to be customer centric, especially now that APIs as products are so prevalent. Here is our definition. Customer centricity is the ability of people in an organization to understand customer situations, perceptions, and expectations. You may have heard the term empathy being used a lot when we talk about product management, product development. That's what we mean when we say you need to have empathy. You need to have empathy for your customers' expectations. Because if you don't, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities that we'll get into in a few minutes. But truly, if you are building API technology, you want to get away from thinking of it as only a piece of technology. You want to get into the mindset of, this is something my customer will use. This is something that we can drive business outcomes because it's so delightful to use. So let's take a little bit of a step back and say, what does a customer mean in this context? Because, you might traditionally think of a customer as a person buying a pair of pants, but your customer is the person who's using your external API. They're, just like Rafael said in the previous session, your developers. Sometimes they're even, the business end of another business integrating with your API. So customer is an end user, but specifically for monetized APIs in this context. Some of the concepts that we're going to cover in this presentation are absolutely useful for internal APIs too. Don't let that escape you. A lot of this can be used and improved upon for internal API end users as well. But because this is a monetization track, we really want to talk about it from the perspective of a monetized or external API. Now let's get into the meat of why you would even think about APIs from a customer-centric viewpoint. Why do you care, right? The most important reason is because you want people to actually use, continue to use, and pay you for that API that you've produced, right? So if you create an API and put it out into the world, the old adage of if you build it, they will come is no longer relevant. You need to create an API that people want to use. You need to create an API that is delightful, that people want to adopt, that they want to keep using, and that they will pay you for. What has traditionally prevented that level of customer centricity in API development? We at Stoplight have been sort of on the forefront of API design as a concept, and Raphael alluded to this as well. API design is a crucial part of taking your organization API first, putting the API at the forefront of how your business does business. We think it's very, very crucial that we transition away from a previous way of doing business, just taking APIs and chucking them at, you know, whatever problem you have. Oh, we have a backend that needs to be exposed. Let's just put an API on it with no consideration for who that end user will be. You would just go code first, make it, there you go. We think there's a better way. And that better way is more of a figure eight than a shuttle launch pad. It's a life cycle, right? And it's continuous. And the thing that makes it customer centric is the definition. What does a customer need? The design, you know, what will be the best design for the customer to use? Building it and testing it to know that it is what they want, right? Mocking it to make sure that they can give you feedback. And throughout the entirety of the life cycle, getting and applying the feedback from your customers. That's why it looks like a figure eight, because it's continuous. It doesn't end when you launch your API. You continue to improve the performance and the expectations of your customer by providing feedback and iterating on your external API. Let's take a little bit of a step into why customer centricity fits into this talk track. We know that an API as a product is a concept that's becoming increasingly understood. You know what a software as a service is. Like that, API as a product is the way you expose and monetize your organization's unique functionality and services. It's at the core of your business value, right? It's not just the method of delivery. It's not just that technology. It's what is being delivered. It's the value of your business, the value of your data, the value of your core capabilities, and also delivered to your customers. That's why we think APIs, just like a product, any product, should be actively maintained. They should be supported. They should be easy to use. Like I've been saying in this presentation, delightful for your customer. And they should have an owner who advocates for the customer and strives for continual improvement, not just delivery. You need someone who understands the customer and strives to advocate for them at every step of this process that we just showed. How do you do this? We have identified a much simpler way of looking at this into more of a classical product journey. Good old-fashioned product management. Discover what your API needs to do. Discover what your customers need. Discover if it already exists within your API program. Do you have an API that does a little bit of what they need? Can you reuse it? Can you spruce it up and make it external? Taking the time for discovery makes better outcomes, prevents the problem that we see a lot of two teams working on the same thing at the end of the day and then coming together and realizing, uh-oh, we've duplicated our efforts. Taking the time to discover means a better outcome at the end. Then going into product design, empathizing with how the user will want to use the API, making sure that it's spelled out before you even build it, right? Making sure that you have your specification, you get feedback on it. You perform a governance and overview view of how you can adhere to your design standards at your organization. All of that comes about in the design phase. And then when you're ready, you can spin up a mock server. And a mock allows you to get direct feedback from your customer. They can tinker around with it, right? And get their hands on it. It's one thing to have the design, right, and the open specification and the documentation for that and provide it to a customer. It's another thing to provide an actual working mock of your API that gives them a hands-on way that they can test out the functionality and see what needs to be improved before you build it. And then you can build it and measure it and continually improve it. So we think there's a lot of value to be had in the pre-production part of the discussion with your customers. Why? It's because you are free and flexible to do more of the things that matter to your customers. Release features more quickly, right? Your customers are waiting on the features that they want and need. If you are able to get their feedback quickly and put it into the API design process, you can release features that they want. Increase your API's value. Like we talked about at the beginning of the session, customer centricity makes products that people want to use, and so increase the value of your API. Reach new customers and audiences. One of the benefits of having a customer-centric approach is that people love to use your product and they'll talk about it, right? And so that word of mouth or the ability to share something that they like with someone else quickly proliferates and gives you reach you didn't expect before from just launching up an API. And then it also expands your revenue opportunities. When you treat your API as a product, you're thinking of new ways to capture value. And so the business is going to reap benefits from you thinking about your API as more than just that piece of technology. So now you're treating your API as a product. You are thinking about the product stages, every stage of life. And then you are thinking about how to manage and get feedback from your customers, how to design with customer centricity in mind. How do you do it, right? I've talked a lot about needing to do it, but now I want to give you some concrete ways to actually accomplish that. Here are 3 things you can focus on right now at your organization. And I want to step back and say, these are more than just the product manager or the product owner's responsibility. It's more than the developer's responsibility, right? If you're on an API development team, this goes bigger than you. It's a cultural change. I've been a co-host of the API Intersection podcast with Jason Harmon, and together we've learned over the past year that culture is an immensely important part of getting your API strategy going. And when it comes to making customer-centric APIs, it's purely a cultural shift. You need to empathize. You need to be able to anticipate what a customer needs. And those are all human interactions. It doesn't matter what kind of software, it doesn't matter what language, it doesn't matter what kind of API. It's all to do with how you interact and engage with your customer. Here are some ways you can advocate for the customer from your business. Consolidate inputs. So data, right? Data is going to help you. Qualitative and quantitative data are all incredibly important, but they're only as important as you're able to use an action on those pieces of data. So you want them to be consolidated. You want to be able to prioritize based on, how often people are asking for a feature, how big the contract might be if you might lose it because you didn't deliver on a feature that someone wanted. You can quantify how satisfied your customers are. And then you can see, what happens if we make this change? How dissatisfied will they be? You can make predictions. So making sure you consolidate all your inputs from reviews, interviews, sales calls, demos, every place you might get customer feedback, support, customer success. Consolidate them into one place. Product board's a really great place to do that. And then start actioning on those qualitative and quantitative pieces of data instead of in disparate places. Focus on the customer. Okay, this sounds silly, right? Yeah, we've been talking about this the whole time. This is more of a strategy than you might think. If you put into place each level of the business a focus on the customer, it starts to increase velocity throughout the organization. If someone's saying, I'm going to build this thing, but they stop and say, what does the customer want? You're preventing the just build it and they will come approach, and now you're putting the customer first. So if you put the customer first and you start advocating for the customer, the next person will put the customer first, and it continues on throughout the organization. That's how you build a culture change, is you help each other remember, but what will the customer want, right? Always ask that question. And then the third that the organization can do is to invest in skills that build that culture. So we talked about empathy. How do you teach empathy, right? That's an important skill to have to be customer-centric, but it's not a skill you can necessarily teach. But what you can teach is, like I said, the focus on the customer. You can teach the ability to collaborate and to get feedback and to interview customers and to read the data that you consolidated and started actioning on. All of those are skills that you can build that aren't necessarily building empathy, but can rely on in order to be customer-centric. Another really, really important piece that helps you achieve this focus on the customer is to develop a persona or multiple personas, depending on what your APIs are trying to accomplish. If you are not familiar, a persona is sort of a boiling down of the demographics and usage and type of person or user who might use your product. It's an abstraction of the fundamental things that bring together your end user, right? Who is that person? And what does their unique profile look like? And how can we use that abstraction to get into their shoes, right? Is to empathize with them, to understand them better, and to more clearly articulate our message and our product to a person like that persona. But you can't just come up with a persona out of thin air. It requires time. It requires a level of process and understanding how to create a persona from the data that you have consolidated, from the customer research that you should conduct, and it should convey all of the critical data points and behaviors, your users' preferences, the customer's purchasing decisions. How do they purchase software? How will they use your API? How would they like to be sold? And then it should also drive satisfaction or dissatisfaction, right? So your persona should understand what makes them happy, what makes them delighted, what makes them not delighted, right? You should understand what those things are in order to strive to achieve them in your product. Why do this? The reason you would create a persona is because it's so much easier and clearer to articulate a persona and help focus on the customer throughout the whole organization when you can describe them in an easy to understand and clear way. This is good old-fashioned product management. I know my API has to hit a certain persona. Now I know how to communicate what they need and want, and I can help the business understand it. So much better than saying, well, my end user is a group of developers. That helps almost no one. What's interesting is Gartner has conducted a study, and they report that only 36% of their respondents have had a customer persona development process in place for 3 years or more, which means it's an immature process within most organizations. I would say this is probably a generous number because a lot of organizations are startups, right? And so if you're an API driven startup and you haven't thought about a persona yet, now's a great time to do so. And it's not necessarily a developer's job to do this, but it is a developer's job to advocate for your customer. And so you would want to say, hey, product manager, product owner, solutions architect, someone who is on your team. Have we thought about the personas of the end users, the customers who will be using our APIs? And if the answer is no, now is a great time to at least think about it. That's because the next thing you would want to do is to map out their journey. This is a common understanding in many products, right? Understanding how they use your product, how they get to your product firstly, how they sign up for your product, how they use it, what makes them stick around, what makes them want to talk about your product in public, right? How do they invite someone else to the product? A lot of these actions need to be mapped in order for the customer to be understood by the rest of the organization. You want to understand what they're doing, backed by data, to help improve the product at every single step. And this is a great way for you to put inputs for customer feedback, right? So if you have an end-to-end customer journey map, you could say, oh, we're seeing a lot of drop-off after somebody calls our API for the first time. Then they never call it again. What is preventing them from calling the API again? Let's get some direct from the customer feedback and figure out what are common reasons that they're not calling the API again. It's because you have understood that up until a certain point, the customer was performing the journey as you expected, but then they drop off. So this customer journey map is extremely important and really, really helpful for your organization. I want to leave you with this last piece. We talked about a little bit in the beginning of this presentation. Choosing to focus on the customer is a culture change, and it's tough. Culture change is one of the hardest things you can do. You could take a business proposal to anyone and say, I want to switch from SOAP to REST APIs, and here is my reasoning, and here's why we should do this, right? There's a lot of concrete evidence to support something like that. But the evidence to support a culture change is sometimes a little murkier. And so I want to leave with you that when you are externalizing APIs and monetizing them, that the point is to get people to use them, stick around, pay you for them, and then also be delighted enough to talk about them and support your API in the world. So that, to me, says that culture change to focus on a customer is a #1 priority. You want people to stick around. You want them to use your APIs. And so each person who is working with the API, developing it, designing it, it's your responsibility to think about the customer and to help each other think about the customer. So if you ever have a question about, am I doing this for me? Am I doing this for my back end? Am I doing this just because it's easier? Flip the script and ask, what does my customer want? So thank you for listening. And then hopefully I took away a couple of more concrete action items from a pretty squishy idea. But let me tell you a little bit about Stoplight. So I'm the product marketing manager at Stoplight. We are a remote first, but Austin, Texas-based startup. We are a platform for design, documentation, and governance of your APIs. So if you ever had a question of how many tools do I have to use in order to get my design, documentation, mocking, and governance all together, Stoplight's a great place for you to start. You can get started for free right now and try it out. We have some really awesome new governance features, including automated style guides. So if you are a person trying to enable consistency at your organization and you didn't know how to make your API guidelines useful, we have a new feature to help you do so. Go ahead and check it out. So here's a little slide to help you understand all the different features that you can utilize when you sign up for a free Stoplight account. And always happy to answer any questions about Stoplight. We're really passionate about APIs as a product, about design first strategy, and about helping your customers through your APIs that you develop.
Thank you very much. We have a 1 minute and a half for questions. But the first question, when do you consider the developer is the customer or the user for an end customer inside the company, like product manager or someone else?
Yeah, so it's almost one and the same. So a developer is a customer, right? So if they're inside the organization and they're an end user internally, they're still an end user and their feedback is still valuable. So before you launch that API into the into the internal world, even, you want to get their feedback at that design stage before you go production, right? Say, hey, you represent my internal customer. What do you think of this? Check out this mock, play with it a little bit, give me some of your feedback. It can be that simple. And so it's that stage right before you go to develop it and produce it. It's that design stage.
Yeah, because and in a previous talk in another conference, someone said, like, when you buy cereals, for the morning, when you buy cereals, actually the real consumer is probably the child, right? When you buy cereals for child, right? But the payer, the buying, the buying power is on the parents, right? So how do you help people to match the true personas between the developer who will be prescribing, consuming, using, versus the one who will put the credit card or or the statement of work, right? How do you manage that?
So we have that very problem at Stoplight. Not problem. We have that very challenge at Stoplight, which is they're the developer and then the person who swipes the credit card. The way that you get a person to swipe the credit card is by being customer-centric. Your customer is the developer. Just because they don't swipe your credit card doesn't mean that they're not your customer. They absolutely are. They need to advocate for you. So in order to get them to advocate for you, you need them to adopt, to retain, to be delighted, and to proliferate your API throughout the organization. And then they advocate to get that credit card swipe. They're still your customer.
Okay. Totally makes sense. Thank you very much, Anna, for being there with us. Love your energy. Love your pedagogy. It was really a great talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And we'll continue on the topic with a speaker that is highly recognized on the practice of monetizing APIs. He's Derek Gilling, CEO at Mosif. Hello, Derek. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Can't complain. We got a nice sunny day here in San Francisco, even though our winters are usually cold.
Yeah. So let's celebrate that, and for the time we can still celebrate good weather on the planet. And yes, let's learn about best practices when monetizing APIs with you. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, and glad to be here. Today we're going to be talking about some different best practices around monetizing APIs. There's a lot of different business models that have come around API product strategy. That's selling an API directly for revenue. You might have a partner ecosystem where developers is more of a partner rather than a customer. But the topic of this focus is going to be mostly around selling the API directly. A little bit about myself. I'm CEO of Mosif. We're the leading API analytics and monetization platform. I love talking about things around API strategy, analytics, things like developer experience, and also I love IPAs. So if you're ever in San Francisco, feel free to send me an email. Why are we talking about API monetization? The first thing is that selling to developers can be extremely hard. Buying is actually quite different today than it was 30 years ago. If you look at 30 years ago, traditionally sales reps would reach out to the C-suite, maybe do some on-site visits, set up a few database servers, and that's the way that companies would buy technical products. These days, it's much more decentralized than ever before. An individual developer has a lot more control and autonomy over the different tooling they would like to use. The other big piece is that these developers are also skeptical of traditional sales and marketing. They don't want to be told what products they should or should not be using. As soon as a product seems to be pushed onto a developer, it just has a bad taste in their mouth. And in fact, it could push them away from a product that could actually be quite excellent. The other big piece is that there's a lot of different tasks that a developer is working on at any given time. There's always higher priority items, bug fixes, and so on. And the last piece is that developers enjoy building things, right? So sometimes you can run into different organizations where they're walking through a build versus buy discussion. Do they want to actually ensure that their IP stays in-house? Do they have the right customizations that they can roll out? Or should they buy a different product? But the other big challenge is not necessarily just with developers. It's the fact that in order to adopt any type of technical product, you have a lot of different stakeholders that developer needs buy-in from. You have legal review, security review. Does it meet the right compliance requirements for the organization. If you're in a regulated industry like healthcare or financial, there's a very specific set of requirements that a new API or tool must comply with in order for it to be adopted. But you also have things like finance and procurement that can take time, for them to review the contract, or to make sure that it's within the right systems at the company. And lastly, you have leadership that might be driving different product priorities. And so how do you make sure you're getting alignment between, the security team, the product team, executive team, procurement, and so on? So as you can see, there's a lot of different moving pieces. And so there's this newer model that's been coming around, which is land developers first. Get an individual developer pay a token amount, for your API, whether that's $10 a month, maybe it's $100 a month, but at least they're paying something, and they're also getting value out of it before they're asking their manager for $100,000 for this particular product. This allows you to open up your top of funnel. It's a much larger, I guess that should say more middle of the funnel or top of funnel. I don't know why we say bottoms up there. But I guess a different way to put this is some folks will call this product-led growth. Some folks will call this a bottoms-up SaaS for first, API first. There's a lot of different names for this same approach, which is get developers through the door, using the product, and getting to their aha moment. Also, you're reducing that time to paying. And the reason being is you're actually reducing a lot of friction for that manager to swipe the card. Instead of going through legal and security review, instead it's just a very simple click-through terms of service. Instead of dealing with planning out a PLC that might take 30 days or 60 days, you're doing a very simple fast integration, very trial that they can get started with in a matter of maybe 10 or 15 minutes to see that initial hello world. And instead of dealing with procurement and finance and all those other workflows, you just use a manager's credit card, swipe it, it's part of discretionary spending, and not much is needed there. However, the selling process doesn't end there. In fact, this is where the selling process starts. And what you're doing is you're actually selling through these developers. You're selling to a leadership because they have particular requirements. Maybe it's through single sign-on, or maybe they need direct access or direct export, or to connect this API to another tool that they're already using. And those are things that leadership might care about, even though the developer doesn't. Developer might not necessarily care about, do you integrate with Okta or Salesforce or something like that. Another big thing is increased usage. One of the great things about APIs is they're transactional in nature. And so you can get a developer started off with using an API on a very small budget, but then as soon as they roll it out to production, it's a 10x or 100x increase in volume, which might correspond to a larger increase in spend. Lastly, there could be new use cases that come up, different teams that might need access to this, whether it's data or the workflows, whatever it is that the API is providing. So in this, we're not selling to the developer. We're leveraging that developer as a champion to how to promote whatever value this API is creating, and then allowing your sales team to get engaged to drive up the ACV and get those enterprise deals. However, each API business is different. Some folks might think about prepaid billing versus postpaid billing. There's different ways to package your pricing strategy, whether it's more of a traditional 3-tier SaaS model that we see versus more of a pay-as-you-go consumption-based billing model. How do you invoice? When do you invoice? And what level of support do you provide, especially when you have this bottoms up or developer first model? And so for the rest of this presentation, we're going to walk through a couple of key areas around billing and pricing and packaging. But the important piece first, before we go through those, is what is sales actually focused on? They're focused on these high ROI opportunities. So these are developers who already saw value by integrating the API. Maybe it's within their workflow. They might not necessarily be generating revenue or having end users using the API, but at least they were able to test it out with Postman or a different tool. And the sales team's responsibility is more about educating and being more consultative, especially when these different scenarios happen, which is additional use cases, maybe their usage is increasing, and that's a good time for sales to get engaged with these customers, because no one wants to have a massive $10,000 bill for the month, without ever talking to a sales and understanding what is the right way to get the most value out of the platform. So first, we're going to talk about billing strategy. When we talk about billing strategy, there's two popular strategies that we see out in the wild. There's what we call prepaid billing, and this is when a customer is purchasing or paying for their quota ahead of time before it's consumed. This is already popularized within traditional enterprise contracts, where you're paying up for a year up front, maybe you're paying for a quarter up front, or whatever it is that you're set up with. Another is postpaid billing, and we see this a lot within things like ad networks. The cloud vendors have been popularizing this, where you use a product, you don't pay a cent, and then at the end of the month you get a bill for however many compute hours or ad clicks or whatever it is that you use for the last month, and then you pay the bill. And so there's some benefits and cons for both of these models. On the prepaid side, you're able to generate much higher cash flow because customers are paying up front before they even consume the API. This can be extremely helpful, especially if your API itself is expensive to serve. Maybe there's a lot of third parties that you're depending on in order to fulfill those API transactions. It's also more familiar with traditional enterprise who is used to paying upfront for these different enterprise contracts and going through procurement maybe once a year or once every couple of years. One of the biggest cons, though, is that friction in onboarding, because now you're asking for money before they saw that much value in the tool itself. And that's where the postpaid billing is super helpful. As a cloud vendor, I can spin up my VM, or my instance or something, and don't worry about how much it's going to cost, and then see what that cost looks like at the end of the month. This also allows me to not have decision paralysis around how much do I need, right? Because I don't know, is it one compute unit or is it 1,000 compute units? This gives me the ability to actually measure that over a period of time. The second piece I want to speak on is packaging strategy. There's a lot of different ways to package your API. But the two common ways is what we call tiered pricing. This is what we see usually within traditional SaaS products, where you have maybe a free plan, a better plan, and then a best plan. On the flip side, we have what we call pay-as-you-go, and that's what we've been seeing. I would say more of a modern approach to selling an API. We're paying literally per transaction, and so that might be 10 cents per 1,000 API calls, or 5 cents per text message sent through the API, or something like that. On the tiered pricing side, one of the great things is it does enforce a minimum spend. This can be helpful if your support costs are a little bit higher than other products. It's also more predictable for the customer to have a particular monthly bill or yearly bill that they have, and it's not going to fluctuate too much, other than maybe if you add some usage components to that tiered pricing. It's also extremely easy to implement. A lot of software products like Chargebee and Stripe such can easily handle tiered pricing. However, one of the biggest downsides is it can actually be too rigid for customers, and it's hard to have automatic expansion, because what happens is you're waiting for that customer to reach a certain threshold or quota before they're ready to move to the next plan. However, because you might package 10 different pricing levers in a single tier, if a developer only exceeds one of those 10 pricing levers, they may not be ready to actually upgrade to the next tier. They just wait till the next billing month, or just feel not required to move over. Whereas with the pay-as-you-go, you actually have a seamless expansion model, right? Someone can get started easily for 10 cents the first month. The next they're paying $53, and then next month after that they're paying $10,053. So you have this natural expansion revenue. It can appear cheaper because that very first month they're paying 10 cents or 50 cents, and this is something we see with stuff like S3 and some of the very transactional based API products like Twilio. But one of the biggest cons is it can upset customers if you don't manage that process well. No one wants to go from $50 a month in 1 month, and then the next month is $10,000 bill, and they have to explain that to the manager. Why did this API suddenly cost $10,000? It can also be extremely complex to implement. You need metering in place. You need a way for you to track the usage of each customer, especially if your meters are more complex than just measuring API calls, which I hope you are thinking about a complex way to meter. For example, you might have a bulk API that allows you to send 10 text messages, but on a single API endpoint that sends only a single text message. You don't want to build just on number of API calls. You want to build on the actual value that is created through the API, which might be number of text messages sent, which means now you need a way to meter and measure that. The last piece is invoicing strategy. And in this case, we look at two common paths. Number one is the recurring strategy, which is sending out an invoice at the end of each month, or maybe it's each year. It's on some type of schedule with the customer. This is much easier for the finance team to deal with. They know exactly how much they're going to spend. They know it's much easier to recognize that revenue or recognize that cost, especially when we think about GAAP accounting. It's also more predictable for a customer. You don't have these weird situations where you get 2 invoices one month, but the next month you have 0 invoices, and how do you deal with that type of stuff in terms of spend and cash flow? One of the downsides, though, of recurring billing is that you can have bad unit economics, especially for low-cost SaaS. In 1 month, developer can pay just 10 cents. Do you want to actually send an invoice for 10 cents worth? That can actually have much higher burden for your finance team, the customers, customer side, and also just things like transaction cost itself. It can also be a little bit more complex if it's prepaid. On the threshold side, this is what we see within ad networks where, it might be after a certain amount of spend is met, every, say, $10,000, you build a customer. Or in Twilio's case, it's actually prepaid too. So you purchase maybe $500 worth of credits, and then you burn those down over a period of time. So it doesn't really matter when you purchase those credits. You can, purchase them 3 times in 1 month, and the next month you actually have plenty of credits, so you don't need any more. So one of the pros for this is it can actually reduce the transaction cost because you're allowing the customer to bundle a transaction to a larger amount. And so you might have a minimum spend where you had to purchase at least $50 worth of credits. It can also make prepaid much easier because now you already have those credits in place and you just burn them down. The con is that it can be harder for finance departments. So, a lot of the stuff you see here with invoicing strategy is driven more from the finance team rather than the product and engineering team due to the complexities around threshold-based invoicing. Another thing I want to spend is different value metrics around the API. Going back to what I mentioned with text messages, you could have a couple of different APIs, each with the ability to send a text message or even 100 text messages, and ensuring that the API values that you're choosing is actually aligned to the value the customer receives. Another example of this is, let's say you're selling an email API. If you charge for, and let's say also this API allows customers to create email templates in the platform somehow. Maybe it's something that the API can use, just like an HTML template or something like that. There's 2 ways you could probably charge this. One is number of templates that the customer stores in the platform, and another way you could charge is number of emails that are sent through the platform. If you choose a number of templates that a customer stored in the platform, that could be a poor choice for value metrics. The reason being is that customer didn't really see any value, even if they stored all these different templates, set everything up, but they never sent a single email to a customer. They didn't really get that much value. On the other hand, even if a customer just creates one single template, but they were able to email maybe 10,000 different customers, or maybe that was emailing 10,000 different leads, they were able to get some value by sending out those emails through the platform. And so thinking about how it's aligned to customer value, and there's different ways to do this. One of the classic examples is transaction volume, which is number of API calls or maybe number of messages. If you're an analytics platform, it might be number of events that you're tracking. Another example of this is revenue or cost share. And so if you're a payment processor or maybe expense processing platform, it might be percentage of that revenue, percentage of the spend. Maybe it's 2.9% or something like that. We probably know a classic example, a classic company that uses the 2.9% as their pricing lever. But we do have some other ones here. Data volume is a good example, which is gigabytes sent, or maybe it's number of minutes processed. Lastly, we have like user-centric, which are things like monthly tracked users or monthly unique users. This is actually kind of like a modern version of the per seat or per license pricing we saw with more traditional SaaS tools. Even though, roll out a nice usage-based monetization model for your customers, there's still a lot of pitfalls to think about. Number one is that account management is actually very, very hard to deal with when you start scaling out the number of developers or the number of customers. It's one thing to have account management with, maybe it's 20 customers or 100 customers. It's a whole different ballgame when you have 10,000 different developers or a million different developers that you have to manage. Each of these developers are going to have different experience levels, different uses. Some of them might have issues during onboarding. They're going to have different changing business needs. They need to add their manager, and they're able to get analytics out of the platform. They're going to have billing surprises, like I mentioned earlier, which is they get that $10,000 bill. How do you manage this when you're dealing with a developer community of thousands or millions of developers? And one of the best ways to do this is through self-service management, providing tooling to the developer, such as how much of their quota have they used? Do they get alerts when they reach certain thresholds or burn down their quotas? How do they add different team members or get analytics around the use of the tool, and providing those type of analytics and providing the right ways for them to add seats or change things with their count. Do as much as you can so it's self-service. That way your sales team and support team can focus on the accounts that matter, which are the ones that are looking for those larger enterprise contracts. Another thing we recommend is trying to avoid these billing surprises. This is a thing that comes up over and over when you move towards a usage-based billing model, where someone does get that $10,000 bill. Easy way to do that is just over communicate as much as possible. Let developers know when there's an increase in usage. Allow them to configure different thresholds so that when they reach, maybe it's $1,000 a month, they can get their own email so they can take action, whether that's readjusting their plan, whether that's adjusting how they're using the product. On the flip side, your CSM team should also be tracking these accounts, and that's a key component of product-led growth. What you're looking for and what sales team is engaging when they engage with customers is when there's these different indicators, such as it's within your ICP, your ideal customer profile, but also they have increasing usage of the API. Maybe it increased by 200x in the last couple of weeks or something like that, and that's a good indicator for sales to say, hey, you're increasing your use of the API. Let's hop on a call, get you on a plan that makes more sense for your needs, and understand how it can help you get more value out of the platform. Another thing we recommend is how do you reduce friction itself. We talked about using the manager's credit card, but one of the downsides of that is you do have employee attrition. That credit card could get canceled. It might have low limits on it. And one thing you can leverage is things like AWS Marketplace, Azure Marketplace, Sales. They all have different ways for you to use their billing platform. And so if an Amazon customer, Salesforce customer already has a committed spend with Amazon, you can actually just be another part of that contract without having a separate negotiated contract with your business. When you start growing your developer community, you're not going to be able to talk to every single developer out there. And that's one of the tricky things about these developer first or bottoms up business models, is how you actually systematically create understanding of how well your product is doing. And one way to do this is creating these activation and conversion funnels. A classic example for an API business is what I'm showing here, which is you visit a page, if you go into a doc page, blog article, something like that, they sign up for the platform, they start looking at onboarding, getting started, maybe you present some API keys or something like that for them to get, and then they make their first hello world. The first hello world is a very, very important point in this activation funnel, in that they spent enough time to either implement the SDK, maybe they made some API calls through Postman, but they at least invested time and also proved that they are a developer and technical enough to start using your APIs. Doesn't necessarily mean they got value out of the platform yet. Because if you just made a few API calls through Postman, that is not like a fully working app that's deployed where end users is using or somehow generating revenue. And that's that last step there, which is going from hello world, where you just made a few API calls through Postman, to having a fully deployed solution that is creates value for the organization. And that might take some time. It could be dependent on outside factors like the security review stuff that we talked about earlier. And so for you as an API provider or someone that's selling an API, it's really important to keep feeding content and enablement material for the developers and for the other folks that might be involved with rolling that out, whether that is you're compliant or different articles around your security practices. What might be missing here could also mean creating tooling for things like acceptance testing. Segment did a phenomenal job where if you're using the Segment APIs, they actually had a set of tools they could also run to validate that you're integrated with the APIs correctly.
Hi, Derek. We're on time, so if you can wrap up, please.
Sure. Yeah. Lastly, what to measure: conversion rate, and then time to reach the next step. Quite a few different developer personas, so helpful to measure that, so you can slice and dice that activation funnel between title, role, size of company, and so on. An example of this is now we can actually generate a funnel where we see that Reddit ads actually converts at a higher rate than some of these other activation channels or marketing channels that we have. And we can see here that conversion rate is around 42%, and it takes around 7 hours to convert. So our key takeaway is create a great self-service onboarding. Make sure you over communicate with developers. No one wants to be surprised, and so if you send out those emails, you stay in touch with them, you can have a really good and monetizable API. Cool.
Yeah, thank you very much, Derek. We're really out of time. I would have loved to ask many questions, but for next time we will for sure ask all these questions, especially when it's not transactional APIs. When there are business models based on the total number of end users or tokens or whatever, not directly infrastructure or transactional like like pay as you go or stuff. I would love to have asked these questions, but let's keep it for a next event.
No worries. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much, Derek. And again, if you want to know more, you can go on Mozif homepage to know more about all what they do, but helping you to monitor community and your APIs and analytics and be able to know what you do with your APIs and monetize them. So perfect. Now, last but not least, for this segment on API product and monetization, we will have a great influencer and thought leader in the space, Adam Vander, principal consultant at Every Developer, and he will talk with us about what your API marketing needs. Hello, Adam.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks, Mehdi. Yeah, it has. It's been super and exciting to follow API Days today. It's great to be part of it as well, and to share the stage with Centricity and Stoplight and Mozif, all really great companies and with really great messages. So I'm excited to close out this session here.
Last but
today.
not least.
That's right. Yeah. Well, super. And for my part today, I have 5 short stories, and from that, we'll be able to get 3 mistakes that I hope you all can avoid in your API marketing. So in a lot of the work that I do with developer-focused companies, I find that a lot of people want to be Reddit famous. Maybe developers also want to be Reddit famous. And I'm here to tell you that I have been Reddit famous, and this is the first story here. It was a long time ago. It was maybe 2005 or 2006, and I wrote a post on REST for Wired and their WebMonkey resource. So it was focused on web developers and trying to say, what is this new thing, this REST thing that we've heard about? And what happened was someone added it to Reddit, and they added it to Dig as well, which kind of dates it a little bit there, right? And I got this screenshot from my editor, who was super excited because lots and lots of visits were coming from this. And then I did the thing that you are never supposed to do on the internet. And that was that I read the comments. And I remember people going and saying negative things about this piece that I had done that was attempting to show what is this REST to someone who is a web developer but has never heard of kind of APIs and what you would do with REST. And one in particular, now deleted Reddit account, went through line by line explaining what I had got wrong from their perspective as a 2006 era REST expert. And what I took away from that first experience being Reddit famous is that developers are a really tough audience. And now, having spent the years since then working with that audience, it is still the case, but they can also be a really rewarding audience. And so the remaining stories will be others interacting with those with those developer audiences. Now, a lot of times we'll see Stripe mentioned as kind of the pinnacle, the one that you want to be like. This is Stripe's page circa 2011, and I think it says sort of how Stripe became successful, more so than docs or anything. It was understanding the developer mindset and the problem that they solved, that you used to have to get this merchant account to be able to get started. And they helped to show that that didn't have to be the case. They solved real developer problems, but they created one for those of us who have APIs and want to reach developers, which is not only a high bar to hit, but also this sort of expectation that because you have an API, developers are who you want to reach. And this was touched on a little bit in some of the earlier talks, but the second story is related to that and comes from my time at Zapier, where we connected thousands of apps together to be able to allow end users to automate things. But of course, those of us who are at API Days know that behind the scenes of those apps are actually APIs. And so I worked on the platform side, helping someone who had an API connect it to our users. So they have to know about APIs. They have to be really technical. And so one of the things that we did was create a CLI for our platform. And this was the first sort of landing page. After that, we had this sort of legacy builder, but that was still the main way. But we said, oh, you can try this new CLI. Understandably, people didn't really want to do that as much because it's not the main thing, right? So we gave it sort of equal billing at some points. We looked at our style guides and we said, oh, maybe it's the primary thing we want people to do. We should make this blue button. But still, at each of these stages, everyone still went to that old way of doing it, even though we had this great developer tool that people had told us they wanted. Eventually, we did something like this. It became the primary call to action. You would think at this point that would be the one that would get clicked, but still people went down. And this is not an exact screenshot, but my memory is that we said something like this, that this is super old, don't use it. And still people clicked that link, not the button to use the more developer-friendly version, but the other one that was more visual. And what we realized at the end of this is mistake number one that I've now seen many companies make in my work at Every Developer which is that mistake of looking at Stripe's an API, so therefore we should reach developers directly. And this assumption that just because there's an API, it means that your company is dev focused, that you want to reach those developers directly, that they are that primary audience. And the reality is that it's a spectrum that could go down to kind of developer enabled, where someone else discovers everything, swipes the credit card, like was mentioned earlier, and then sort of hands off to a developer. That's kind of the further end of the spectrum there. And there are spots in between that I've pinpointed here in this, and there's probably more ways to break it down. But the reality is that these two at the far end, closer to focused, is really where any marketing activities would be needed. And that if marketing activities that are directed at developers and that are really focused on developers, and that as you go the other way, you still need things that speak to developers, but there's less sort of marketing activity. So it could be that some of you who are watching this now recognize you're all the way on the left side of this, and that your roadmap that says be exactly like Stripe might have been changed now. You can do less. So that's the first mistake. And now going into the third story here of my time at Programmable Web, where we saw thousands of API announcements. And they would be boring, much like this one that I made up here. And it was my job to try to figure out what story was within this API announcement. And again, it comes from this standpoint of expecting that the API, having an API means that you definitely have this developer focused audience. But my job was to figure out what the point was of something, something like how to divide by zero in this case, as they're trying to explain by their API, but API announced. But really that effort of what something does and who it is for is something that, regardless of who your audience is something that is really up for you to figure out what the point is. That shouldn't be on someone at Programmable Web or wherever. And hint, in the largest light bulb possible here, the product is not the point. And that brings us to mistake number 2, which is putting that emphasis on the product. And it would be really awkward now with this slide on this mistake and on promotion if I were to then promote my product. But I only do it to communicate. This is my book that goes through how to reach developer audiences, but I really do it to highlight this main point of the entire book. You can save yourself 140 pages of reading here with just reach developers with education and not promotion. And if you do that one approach, and it sort of addresses these couple of mistakes that we have mentioned so far. So one thing about education that sometimes is misinterpreted, and in fact, there are education groups within API companies that are fully focused on training, and that's a different kind of education. You might look, again, Stripe docs. They're looked at as the best that you can have, but in this case, this is not the type of education, or at least not the only type that you should be thinking about. So this is very product focused, and you want to be able to think of education outside of the product as well. And to give an example of that, I have another story. This story is about a young man who grew up in a desert town. He was an orphan, and he got into some trouble and ended up finding his father's good friends for some help, and needed to actually use that friend to be able to get out of town. And as they were leaving, they were stopped by troopers. And maybe you've heard this story before. And the father's friend says, "These are not the droids you're looking for," and is able to get through this checkpoint with that. Now, this is, of course, from Star Wars, but we can pull some information, some developer-focused information from Star Wars, I'm confident. And I call this the developer content mind trick. That you'll have a developer who comes to you and has a problem. And remember, we want to educate. So let's take them through a potential solution to that problem that does not involve your product. And in fact, shows them exactly how to do it without you, to give them a blueprint. This is how you build this on your own. Because the reality is, we know that developers are going to think about doing that. And so if our educational content can start from that point of view, that we're going to help them do that, then much like the Jedi mind trick, we will actually change their mind, and they will see that there are a lot of edge cases to what you have done for in your API. That there are there's maintenance, not just building it once, but there's a lot that takes to keep it running. And so that is the developer content mind trick. And this is one example of someone who has done it well. Gremlin, their Chaos Monkey guide is, as it says here, about 18,000 words. It's huge. And it goes deep into how to implement Chaos Monkey, how to have a chaos engineering approach. But even though it's got Gremlin there on the nav bar, it's not each of these sections is not, here's how to use Gremlin. It's not education around that. It's education around the entire concept of how you would do this. And if you want another book other than the one that I mentioned previously to consider, that does a good job of getting this same point across, and in fact across non-developer worlds as well, it is Badass by Kathy Sierra. And the example that is used throughout that book is about cameras. If you're a camera manufacturer, do you want to educate them on how to use the camera? That's more the product focused. Or do you want to make them a better photographer? And Kathy Sierra says the latter. You want to educate on photography, not on the product itself. And so mistake number 3, definitely related to the focus on the product mistake, is to teach the camera and not teach the photography. So avoid that mistake. And it's really hard especially when you are as close as you are to your API product. It is really hard to be able to kind of flip that perspective. And it's so I have a little trick for one way that you might be able to test whether you are doing that. But think of it as, hey, there's me with my developer delight behind me. But that's how I look to you. In most Zoom calls and other video tools, I actually look like that, because that's how I look to myself in the mirror. That's how I look to me. Other people see the other, right? So find that way to be able to flip that perspective. And this trick, which is a keystroke on your keyboard, can help you. And so let's say this was a blog post and you are my digital. Apologies to my digital if you are watching this. But this was a kind of a press release sort of announcement, and found it to be a good example. So if you Control F or Command F on your keyboard and then search for your product name or your company name, if you did that here, you would find that there are all sorts of mentions of that. This is the second page here. So 5 on the first page, 5 on the second page, and then closing out here 3 on the last page. So that is 13 mentions of the company all throughout. There's a pretty good chance that this, without any other information, is very product focused. So let's see an example of something that doesn't do that. So this was an ad on Facebook or LinkedIn or somewhere that I saw. So LaunchDarkly paid money for me probably to see this ad, definitely for me to click this ad. So apologies to LaunchDarkly because I did click this ad and didn't sign up, but I got so much more from it because I ended up on this landing page that they paid to get me to. And I did the Control F trick, and you can actually see, it takes right there at the end. So there are 3 mentions there at the very end, but that's after it's been entirely focused on helping me understand feature management and showing everything that I will get from this. And yes, they want my email address. They also did pay to get me there, but still they took a very problem focused approach or education focused approach and not the product focused approach. And so as I close, I'm going to have one last story here. And this is a time, it's maybe a little bit of patting myself on the back of when I was able to keep things problem focused and not product focused. This was for Zapier. It was definitely meant to promote our platform and get people using authentication, hopefully modern authentication practices. And I used the Control F trick on my blog post, and let's see how I did here. Okay, there one mention of Zapier or the platform there, and nothing. I'm going through showing some best practices. Use OAuth. This is great. Okay, one other little Zapier mention there. And then finally here at the end, okay, I give a little bit of a call to action that says, hey, we have this platform. You can connect your API to it, right? But 3 mentions in I think it's less than 2,000 words, but still, it's a long blog post. And do developers appreciate that is the question. They do. So this guy, he called it a brilliant post. I don't know. I kind of think that he was saying I was brilliant, but I've actually not told you the full story here. I haven't shown you the full tweet. So this so much, this is a brilliant post. That's real, but I forgot this part. Other than the marketing spiel, which is to say the 3 mentions of our platform across 1,500 words or whatever. And this wasn't that long ago, right? Just a few years ago. And yet I was still relearning a lesson, the lesson that I started with, that developers are a tough audience. And I don't know if I would change anything about that post that I wrote. But I do think of that developer almost every day. As we work with clients and who are maybe saying, could we promote just a little bit here, right? And there's there's a line that developers will hold you to. They are a tough audience, and in the end, they help us create much better content that is marketing, but is educational and can help them better use your product by being better informed about the entire problem space. And so they are a tough audience. If you ever want help navigating that path with them, you can find us at Every Developer. In the meantime, make sure you avoid these mistakes of assuming that you're dev focused, because maybe you can get away with less of that dev marketing. Don't promote your product, but do look for ways to educate. And specifically in that education, don't teach cameras, as Kathy Sierra would say, teach photography. And that is the 5 stories and 3 mistakes that hopefully can improve your API marketing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam. You started 2 minutes late because of the delay, so we'll keep the 2 minutes for the question. Man, developers are tough. 3 mentions, of Zapier.
Yeah.
Like for SEO, it needs to work with keywords, right?
Right.
Wow.
Like I said, I don't think I would change anything. I mean, who knows? Today I might have made it more, had more mention of the platform in it. Although I think that story goes back also to recognizing that developers weren't the primary audience for that platform, and that's maybe part of where that disconnect is. So because there wasn't as much of a connection to that developer who's looking at authentication, there wasn't a sort of change. It didn't make sense for them to make that leap to the platform, that made it feel all the more, didn't connect as much, right? Whereas if I was talking about a problem that really connected with that developer, then it would be a much more authentic call to action. So that might be the piece about that's actually the bigger deal, is that realization.
Yeah, and Zapier is not a highly funded company. They just made a really small, I think, seed round, and they're not overly funded, mostly funded by customers, which is the best way to be funded.
Yeah.
And so the pressure is not there. But just imagine company who raise like 30, 40, 100 million,
right,
pushing for developers and everything. They want this marketing approach, and they will do everything wrong.
Yeah. And so and so that's why that first mistake is probably the most important, is understand that just because you have that API does not mean that developers are the immediate audience that you need to reach.
Yeah. So, but maybe if you really teach not how to use cameras, but if you teach photography, but you don't have the best camera out there, are you just like evangelizing the market for everyone?
Right. Yeah. Is there a better camera that they end up going for? I mean, I think you find what your camera is good at, right? So, I mean, Instagram didn't have the best, most beautiful pictures, and this is not even taking that much of a metaphor there, right? Like, that's actual photos, and you had these filters, and it wasn't because people were posting the perfect photo. It was a photo that was good for the moment, right? So what's the sort of equivalence that you can find in your own API that maybe you aren't the Stripe even of your industry, but what is the area where you can really focus your education on that? What's the thing you do best that you can kind of plant a flag with?
Yeah, and many great companies like DigitalOcean are this go-to community before going to market. Like they know they're a source of truth and a source of knowledge for developers, and whatever at some point they will achieve maximum, let's say, matchmaking with what developers want and what their product are doing. Let's say it like that. It cannot transform donkeys into horses, as we can say in Europe, but at least it will give you the maximum the matchmaking that you can have, right?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam. Thank you for being there again.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
No, yeah, definitely. On this, developer marketing does not exist. API marketing, like how-tos and mistakes, right? Yeah, we would love to have you at the Apidays interface events.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Adam. And so we are back. We will go for the last break of the day, and yeah. So see you in like 15. No, let's say exactly 15. 20 minutes from now, like 20 minutes, 3:20 PST, 3:20 PST. We'll be there in 20 minutes. So yeah, you can enjoy a break or coffee or whatever. You can go make the treasure hunt we have organized for you, or see the sponsor at their online booth. See you in 20 minutes. Thank you very much.